Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Tale of the Trilobites. Over the last few episodes, we have been covering the 11 orders of Trilobites. This time we shall be covering one of the smaller groups, the Lichida, but despite its size, they more than make up for their very ornate forms. As always, we shall be discussing their group's evolutionary history, the history of them being studied, their relationships both within the group and to other trilobites, their ecology, how to potentially identify them with diagnostic traits in the field, and in the end, what actually happened to them, as well as give an overview of the diversity to be found within the group. As always, though, let us start with a survey of their history of study and how the group has changed and how we humans understand them. And it's a little spiny. Alright, so the Lichida were first recognized as a distinct order in 1959 by the otherwise fairly obscure paleontologist Joseph Curtis Moore, for which sadly we don't have much info on him, not even a photo. He seems to have, aside from this one trilobite contribution, mostly focused on mammals, describing various species of whales and squirrels in what is now Asia. Back on topic, the Lichida were a solid grouping for a period of time, containing three superfamilies, the Lichoidea, the Damselloidea, and the Odontopleuroidea, with the three being generally considered to be one grouping. However, soon this started to be questioned, with trilobite scientists like Harry B. Whittington pointing out how the Lichida had a protaspis that was twice the size of the Odontopleurida. By the way, in the episode 2 of this video series, I went over a bunch of the trilobite anatomy terminology, so please consider checking that out if you hear any words you're a bit confused by and would like to learn more on a word that I say that you just don't understand. I don't want it to be too repetitive, so I decided to put all the explanations into that video, and I hope you understand that. Further differences were pointed out by other trilobite researchers, such as Richard Forte. These included different ornamentation, major differences in their lobe structure. Lichida lobes arise from the axial furrow in a very unique manner, while Odontopleurida lobes arise from the glabella, which is far more standard in trilobites, and the extent of calcification on the ventral side. In the end, this led to the Odontopleurida and the Damselloidea to be elevated to a separate order in 1988, the second most recent new order of trilobites to be recognized. This is still a bit controversial, and some sources still include both of them within the same order. Not helping matters is that the oldest family of Lichida, the Lichacalcephalidae, contains members that seem to be more related to the Odontopleurida than they are to Lichida, potentially rendering it polyphyletic until it gets further refined in the future. Regardless of whether they are two separate orders or, the same order, which, for the record, I do consider them separate orders, which is why they each get their own video. They are each other's most close relatives and serve as a separate branch of trilobites, evolving from the red Lichida, independent from the Corynex, Agnostida, and Pedicoparida, all of which I've covered in past episodes, which you should check out if you'd like to learn more about those groups. But now that we've covered how they've been classified and how they potentially relate to other trilobites, let us now discuss how to identify them in the field should you come across them. Alright, so Lichida are often characterized as being the quote-unquote spiny trilobites, and while that is true, that is a very superficial trait, as many trilobites are quite spiny, despite being unrelated and included members of the Protida, the Phacopida, Corynex, and of course the Odontopleurida, but rather it's more subtle traits that you must look for if you want to identify them. First, starting with the cephalon or head, there are some unique terms that apply to this group alone for specific unique features they possess. First is the presence of a longitudinal furrow, which is a furrow that is longitudinal. Then there is the volar lobe and posterior lateral cranial lobe. Eyes are often of average size and they have a concomitant hypostome. Moving down to the thorax/body, it is highly variable, but usually they have 10 to 11 segments and are, of course, often extremely spiny, especially along the edge. The pygidium or tail is usually isopygous or micropygous, meaning it is around the size of the head or slightly larger, often longer than it is wide, and is usually tipped with spines or leaf-like growths. Keep in mind, however, that this is a general description, which may not apply to all, and depending on how complete the specimen is, some of these traits can be a little obscured. So as always, you should always consult your local museum for any trilobites you happen to find, as they can help you a lot more than I can. Plus, honestly, if you're not really recording the location of where you find a trilobite, you probably shouldn't try to remove it from the rock. But anyway, just contact your local museum. Anyway, now that we've discussed the diagnostic traits of Lichida, let us now discuss the diversity we found within this order of trilobites. And there's a fair amount. Alright, so the Lichida currently is divided into two families, very unevenly. The Lichidae and the Lichiocephalidae. Let us start with what is the smaller of the two families, the Lichiocephalidae. This family is the older of the two and is mostly known from the Cambrian. They were also, ironically enough, less spiny than later forms, which makes, their final fate kind of ironic. It contains 14 genera. Notable ones of this family include Lichocephalus, which gave the family its name. The second family is much larger, with 49 genera, and set the standard for the group. They are themselves divided, according to a 2005 paper, into a set of subfamilies and tribes. Subfamilies are a taxonomic rank below family, and tribe is a division of Linnaean taxonomy that is below a subfamily but above a genus. Yeah, Linnaean taxonomy is a lot more complex than they really teach you in school, but it's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. First is the subfamily Trochurinae, which includes 10 genera, with such amazing individuals like Acanthophaginae, which had these huge spines, and Ceratarges, which had even bigger spines and stalked eyes, as well as the admittedly somewhat more basic genera like Hemiarges and Acantarges. The next group, the tribe Dicaropeltini, is much smaller, only containing 5 genera, the most notable ones being the genus Dicaropeltis and Urolichus. The third largest trilobite of all time, Urolichus, reached 660 millimeters or 25.98 inches long. However, unlike the more famous Isoletus rex, this was a much lighter animal, as while Isotellus itself was mostly big to its own, girth, the size of these giant lichidids was mostly due to a long spine on the pygidium/tail. The next tribe is the Lichinae, is even smaller, only containing a single genus, that being the genus Lichas, a somewhat average trilobite known for giving this entire order its name, and ironically enough wasn't all that spiny. It seems to have not developed the increasing level of spines that later groups did. The third tribe is the Platycini, which contained 4 genera. The most interesting one was Platylichus and Arcturnurus. The fourth tribe is the Tetralichini, which contains 4 genera. The most notable one is Amphilicus, And the fifth and final tribe, as well as the ones that were the most spiniest, were the Lichina, containing four genera, the most notable one being the genus Terataspis, a clown-nosed Goliath that, in addition to having a very gnarly spiny tail, had a very unusual nostril that, frankly, as I stated before, looks a lot like a clown nose. And it was massive, reaching 600 millimeters or 23.62 inches. I wouldn't want to mess with this one. Definitely seems like it could hurt if you stepped on it. Overall, this group is filled with a great collection of beautiful genera that truly show how ornate some trilobites could get. Now let's go on to the ecology of the group and how they may have lived in life. Alright, so compared to the other groups I've discussed, there's been rather few ecological studies on this order. However, some inferences can be made due to their morphology, though I should stress this will probably be a lot more speculative than some of the other videos in this series where I can provide more solid, objective facts on ecology. It seems that most Lichida were generalist bottom feeders that inhabited shallow reefs, kinda akin to a lot of crabs today. However, the armor indicates that they were under a great deal of predation compared to earlier forms, which does make sense as eurypterids and jawed fish replaced cephalopods like orthocones as top predators, and these spies likely deterred them from choosing these guys as prey. I mean, honestly, look at some of these guys. Would you want to stick that in your mouth? I don't think so. In addition, this highly ornate spiny forms are likely similar to those of a lot of modern reef invertebrates, where they help to break out the outline of them and would have made them even harder to spot. And they also could have served as anchor points for algae and other things to grow on them, further serving as camouflage alongside, of course, various color schemes that they likely had. Overall, perhaps not the most solid view of their ecology, but there's some interesting stuff that one can hypothesize on this group, and it's definitely led to a lot of very interesting paleo art, depicting them as having colors similar to, certain living arthropods. Overall, now that we've gone over their ecology, let us discuss how they evolved over time, aka their evolutionary history, and hopefully answer the question of what in the end happened to these spiny guys. The Lichida were the sixth order to emerge around the middle of the Middle Cambrian, likely from some of the last red Lichida or possibly the Corynexochida, though that's a bit debated, which is why I didn't mention it earlier. The oldest Lichida were relatively minor parts of the Cambrian trilobite fauna. It did see a minor increase in diversity in the late Cambrian Ordovician. Seemingly they weren't as impacted by the extinctions that ended either of those periods as more archaic groups like the red Lichida, Pedicopaurida, the Asaphida, and the Corynexochida and Agnostida generally declined. These guys seem to have minorly increased, though it wasn't until the Silurian that they really began to diversify and became the third most common trilobite group by the Devonian. It is likely that their highly ornate spiny armor helped them adapt to new predators like jawed fish, which put new levels of pressure on various trilobites to an extent that they had not really seen a lot beforehand. They had a high level of diversity during this period. With this impressive armor, you might ask, what could possibly have destroyed the mighty Lichida? Well, it was the trees. Yes, much like the Corynex that I've discussed before, the Lichida were wiped out by the end Devonian mass extinction events, which was really two separate events close together, but they were so close together that honestly most people treat them as one, but it should be stressed they are technically two separate groups. While volcanism and global cooling both were significant factors, it seems that they didn't respect the Lorax enough, as it was due to trees that there was a lot of excessive weathering, which released a lot of excessive nutrients into the water. This fed an explosion in plankton slash algae that led to blooms that sucked up the oxygen in the shallow waters that Lichidas primarily lived in, leading to a lack of oxygen and eutrophication. So in the end, despite the Lichida's very strong armor, they simply couldn't survive. I mean, they just literally couldn't breathe, and so died. And they weren't the only ones, too. Basically, all trilobites except the Brotida also died out, as did most of the Eurypterids, pretty much nearly all of the jawless fish, most of the acanthodians, and all of the placoderms, which were formerly the dominant fish group. It seems that in the end, despite their heavy armor, they couldn't protect themselves during these period of extreme changes. And as for why they may have gone extinct, I think it mostly comes down to the fact that they were universally shallow water dwelling groups with very little evidence that any of them really went into the depths. And that combined with the fact that their larvae were plankton meant that they were likely heavily impacted by this sudden mass extinction event. It's kind of sad, really, but from the Lichida, we learn much about the highly ornate forms that trilobites got over their time on Earth, and the measures they took that led to them avoiding predation. We also learn that no armor is perfect, and that in the end, you have to be adaptable in times of change, otherwise, you could end up drowning at life. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master. If you liked this video, liked it. But if you loved it, consider liking, subscribing. And next time on the Tale of the Trilobites, we will be discussing the sister group to the Lichida, which I've mentioned multiple times previously, the Odontoplurida, which were somehow even more spiny. Take care and have a wonderful day.